Hey, juniors, we are about to hit chapter 5 in The Great Gatsby. And I'm going to apologize for my little sign back here. This is actually for the plague and ideas that come out of it for the seniors. But I am filming, this is my 6th video, averaging between 20 to 30 minutes of video. This is my 6th one. I'm up here on Saturday doing it. And you know what? I just did not want to change it. I know that was lazy of me, but I promise to do better in the future. So let's start looking at chapter 5 as we're really starting to elevate our rising action in this. And I'm going to keep it pretty short. I've managed to shrink down my notes, and we're going to do a little bit more discussion in class. And I apologize for those of you who are doing at home or distance learning. And I know that some of that you're going to miss out on. I'm trying to figure out a way to record more of that for you too. You're still on my mind, guys. I haven't forgotten about you, I promise. So let's look at chapter 5. Chapter 5 is going to be where we finally get Nick's there, but we get Daisy and Gatsby in a room together in the modern, like current, present time versus just flashbacks of how they used to be in love. So we initially see, Nick comes home and Gatsby's, knows that this meeting is going to occur. So he's really, concerned about everything being perfect. You know how this is. We plan something out. We want everything to be just right. And of course, if you've learned anything, it never is. All right. But Gatsby's got this idea of how he wants this to go, and he wants to make sure it's all set up. Something as simple as, making sure all the grass is cut at Nick's house, because, Nick's house is kind of a shack. So he wants to make sure all this is done. But you do begin to see a little bit about Gatsby that he's not very confident here. There is this element that he's a little bit awkward here. We're regressing from the Gatsby character to his actual name, which is Jay Gatz, not Gatsby. We see this regression to this pre-war guy that was just, awkward middle school seeming guy, okay? Gatsby also does something that's kind of an insult to Nick, I think. He offers him a job, but it seems like it's one of those, well, since you're doing a favor for me, let me help you out like thing. And Nick declines it. He does point out that if he had taken the job, who knows what would have happened for him. But Gatsby does point out this isn't business with Wolfshine. This would be legitimate. But again, bringing up that little suspicion about Wolfshine. But Nick, again, just says, no, thank you. So Nick contacts Daisy and calls her. And I'm going to tell you guys something. Daisy and Nick, their relationship is so uncomfortable to me at times. And this is the most uncomfortable it gets. He calls her and he invites her over and he says, hey, don't bring Tom, which right away, that shows how little tact Nick has. That's a weird thing to say. And Daisy plays along with it. She's like, oh, who's Tom? Ha ha. And she kind of giggles and does her airheaded thing. And when she shows up, she even jokingly comments about why couldn't Tom come? Are you in love with me? And remember, they're related. So that's just creepy. So, anyway, so Daisy's invited. She goes through this weird, who's Tom thing. And then a few days pass, and then the big day comes. And, of course, it's raining, and the weather's awkward and terrible. And the weather's not awkward. Gatsby's awkward. The weather's not. So it automatically starts things out bad, and it throws Gatsby off completely because that wasn't part of his image in his head. So when he does get there, Gatsby's there early, and it's going to be Daisy's going to show up, and Gatsby haphazardly happens to be there. Really not a great plan, to be honest with you, but that's the setup. But Gatsby's so nervous and so uncomfortable, and he doesn't know what to do. He even at some point is fumbling around. Now Daisy gets there before this happens. He's fumbling around with the clock and breaks it. I guarantee you, unless you did some external research, which most of you probably didn't, you probably missed that part. You may have noticed there was a clock, but you probably didn't think much of it. The clock is another heavy-handed symbol, all right? And I say symbol hesitantly there because I would argue that's probably not what it's about, but it's the clock is going to represent time, of course. And anytime you see clocks being mentioned in literature, you've got to at least consider the fact that maybe time's involved. The fact that Gatsby knocks it over and it breaks it, time stops, on the clock, and literally, or not literally, time hasn't stopped, but figuratively it has because the clock has stopped. So for Gatsby, time has stopped. Gatsby is trying to do something that is impossible. And he even comments on this later. I think it hasn't happened yet, about recapturing the past. And we all know that's not an option. Guys, you have memories of your past of locations or people that they're not true. I mean, in your mind, especially if you were a little kid, the way you perceive certain places, they may be scary or magical. And when you go back to them as a 17, 18-year-old or a 42-year-old, they're not quite the same. I mean, I remember being young and going to a country club with my grandparents, and it was called Eden. And we would go there, and I remember this in my head, this pool was this amazing pool with waterfalls and all this just, it was just the most beautiful place ever when I was a little kid. Well, I had been back since, and it wasn't, we weren't talking like decades later, but, probably before I graduated high school, I went back and it was a normal swimming pool and it always had been. But for some reason as a kid, it was more magical. So the way we see the past is, first of all, not usually true. And second of all, there's no way to go back and recapture that. The first time you've ever seen a movie or something, you can't recapture that excitement. You can watch it a million times and you'll like it different ways, but recapturing that initial is not there. I'm a music person, and I remember certain albums. The first time I heard them, I thought it was the most amazing thing I'd ever heard, and I love those albums still, but I never can recapture that same excitement from the first time. Now, Gatsby's convinced you can recapture it. He thinks if you have enough resources and enough money and enough of everything, you can do it. He's wrong, and we're going to find that out. But anyway, Gatsby's like really awkward here. He says he's pale. He like leaves Daisy in the room and like goes outside and gets soaking wet, standing there looking like just a wet dog. Breaks the clock. He's sulky. Just none of this works out. But then they actually, when we have this meeting of the two of them, Daisy and Gatsby in a room, it's cringeworthy in a lot of ways. And Nick just can't. He gets secondary embarrassment. He walks out and leaves them there. But then he comes back, and let me read the passage when he comes back and he sees the two of them sitting there. Let's talk about it. It says, they were sitting at either end of the couch, looking at each other as if some question, let me read, as if some question had been asked or was in the air, and every vestige of embarrassment was gone. Daisy's face was smeared with tears, and when I came in, she jumped up and began wiping at it with her handkerchief before a mirror. But there was a change in Gatsby that was simply confounding. He literally glowed. Without a word or gesture of exultation, a new well-being radiated from him and filled the little room. So something has happened since Nick left and came back, and Gatsby is back to his normal radiant self, excited about everything. Daisy's been crying, but Daisy cries at everything. And now the awkwardness has left the room. So Gatsby has apparently had this conversation with Daisy, and he's learned that she still loves him, would be my guess. For her to be sad and for him to be happy, it's got to be something of that nature. We can describe this as a romantic scene if you choose to. Once you read the book, it's hard to see this as romantic as it may seem on the first read. All right, Gatsby almost busts himself here. He starts making some comments, and hopefully you picked up on them, that contradict his story about who he is. He mentions how his house and how it took him 3 years to earn that money. I think it's the house they're talking about there. And let me check because I don't want to be wrong. I'm pretty sure it's the house. Yeah. It took me just 3 years to earn the money that bought it. And then I thought you inherited your money. He says, I did old sport, so we know he's talking to Nick there. I did old sport, he said automatically, but I lost most of it in the big panic, the panic of the war. And then he cuts him off. He's like, that's my affair, though. And then he points out he was in the drug and oil business at some point, but he's not now. So he's like piling up lies here. And good readers have caught on to this. And if you weren't suspicious before, you should be getting suspicious. There's something else about Gatsby. And a lot of him is not as it seems. Well, at this point, Gatsby seems to really want to highlight that he inherited his money, didn't earn it, which, again, I hate that this is a thing. You should be seen as a much better person if you earned your money than if you were given your money. Now, I don't want to see you as a bad person just because you inherited money. That's not your fault. I wish I inherited money. But the fact is if I'm a millionaire because I worked for it, I'm a better person than a person who inherited it, okay? You just are. Maybe not a better person, but that's a more noble thing, that you came from nothing to something than it is I just was born something. But that is not the way society sees it in the 20s, and it is not the way it sees it today, sadly. At this point, we get to, again, one of the really iconic scenes in this book, and I don't know why. I hate this part of the book. We get the tour of Gatsby's house, and there's some really beautiful prose. Let me read you that. As Gatsby's walking over there, he seems to kind of click with him that okay, now I've got what I wanted. It says he had passed visibly through two states and was entering upon a third. After his embarrassment and his unreasoning joy, he was consumed with wonder at her presence. He had been full of the idea so long, dreamed it right through to the end, waited with his teeth set, so to speak, at an inconceivable pitch of intensity. Now, in the reaction, he was running down like an overwhelmed cloud. I mean, most of us don't ever get our dream, okay, and that's okay. But Gatsby is one of the rare people who's actually gotten it, and now it's like, what next? And that's really what the rest of this chapter is about. Is what is he going to do now? Now that he's gotten it, because his whole life has been about getting to this point with Daisy, and it seems like this is going to happen for him. So what's he going to do? That's really powerful prose found on that section. And then we get that ridiculous, and if you saw the movie, you saw it, there's no way you can cast this to make it not ridiculous. The scene where Gatsby's throwing his shirts and Daisy's sitting on his bed and she starts crying. I told you she cries about everything. And it's just ridiculous. And I understand what I don't mean the writing's ridiculous. I just mean the scene is, but I think it's intended to be. What we've got here is Gatsby is showing this is how wealthy I am. I have a ton of clothing I've never even worn. The shirts are still wrapped, some of them, and Daisy grabs them and says how beautiful they are, and then she starts crying because she realizes that she could have had Gatsby and not Tom. And she never really wanted Tom. Although we're going to see some questions about that later because love is more complex than you think it is. There is much more to it than the teen fiction nonsense and TV shows you've seen that tell you it's one way when it's not. So, I mean, I think in a way Daisy does as much as she can love Tom in a way. She definitely loves Gatsby in a different one. And she realized, and I think that what here the crying is about her happiness. She realizes that she could have had this and been happy. Now, she wouldn't have had her reputation, but this was an option for her, and she passed it up so she could live the life that she was supposed to live. And I'm not sure she's happy with it. All right. We also get, as this chapter's closing, the discussion about the green light. If you didn't have a teacher spoil it for you like I did, and you were reading the book on your own, and you saw that initial thing about Gatsby stretching across to the green light, you might not know what it is, but here we find out it is on Daisy's dock, and Gatsby knew that's what it was. So that would have been an important reveal if you didn't already know it. And then, oh man, page 93. Let me read this to you. Again, I love Fitzgerald. He is my idol as far as writing goes. Listen to this. He seemed absorbed in what he had just said. Possibly it had occurred to him that the colossal significance of that light had now vanished forever. Compared to the great distance that had separated him from Daisy, it had seemed very near to her, almost touching her. It had seemed as close as a star to the moon. Now it was again a green light on a dock. His count of enchanted objects had diminished by one. That is beautiful. That is such a powerful section. And again, it's not the word choice as far as he used big words. He used the right words. And what it is it's this image that green light was symbolic for something he loved and he was longing for. And now it's just a green light. The significance has faded. And like the things that keep us going, dreams are important. And not getting dreams are also important. Because once we do get them, they're never what we thought they were going to be. All right. Throughout growing up and even as a 42-year-old, I dreamed constantly of what it would be like to be a musician, guys. Music has been my like everything about my life for so long, and I'm not good. And I never was going to make it. But the brief amount of time where I got to travel around and play and enjoy that lifestyle, I loved it. And I've always longed for getting it back. I also know some musicians and have spoken to people who've gotten a little farther than I did, and the magic wears off really quickly when you're in a van traveling months on end, not seeing your loved ones. Sometimes playing in a place that's a rat hole that's got 10 people show up and none of them are there for you. There's a lot of negatives that come with it too. So it's kind of fun that I can sit here and dream about it and not have to lose that. It's like the old story about don't ever meet your heroes, because it's like you build this person up in your head and then you meet them and then they're just a normal human being and maybe they're having a bad day or something and it just robs you of that joy. So not getting your dreams has sometimes got its positives, or we can end up like Gatsby who gets his dream and it just robs him of the magic of his life. This continues in another passage, actually, on page 95, right at the end. He says, This is Nick. He says, as I went over to say goodbye, I saw that the expression of bewilderment had come back to Gatsby's face, as though a faint doubt had occurred to him as to the quality of his present happiness. Almost 5 years. There must have been moments, even that afternoon, when Daisy tumbled short of his dreams. Not through her own fault, but because of her colossal vitality of his illusion. I'm sorry, because of the colossal vitality of his illusion. It had gone beyond her, beyond everything. He had thrown himself into it with a creative passion, adding to it all the time, decking it out with every bright feather that drifted his way. No amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man will store up in his ghostly heart. So what's happened is Gatsby's realized no matter, and it's not Daisy's fault, but no matter how he has built her up to such a point that she has no chance of achieving it, and it's kind of clicking for him. It's the whole I've wanted this person all my life, and you get him, and you're like, but did I really? Now I don't think Gatsby's that far. Gatsby still really is excited to have Daisy in his life now, and there's going to be some complications later that will cause problems for him. But right now, it's just the idea that this isn't what I expected, in his opinion. As we end, Nick's leaving the two of them there together, and we get another thing about Daisy's voice. And every time, Fitzgerald does it so much, you have to take it as important. It said, as I watched him, he adjusted himself a little visibly. His hand took hold of hers, and as she said something low in his ear, he turned toward her with a rush of emotion. I think that voice held him most, with its fluctuating, feverish warmth, because it couldn't be overdreamed. That voice was a deathless song. So, we constantly are hearing about Daisy's voice. She's always associated with that. And that's a whole nother discussion. Maybe we'll have at some point as we get closer to the end. But that's how chapter 5 ends, and that's how this video is going to end. I hope you guys have enjoyed this book as much as I do. If you didn't, it's okay. We still can be friends. But I think this book is magical. I think that, and not because of the romantic things that people want to put on it. I want you to understand this book is not near as romantic as people make it sound like. The whole Daisy and Gatsby thing is not romantic. It's adultery, okay? It's trying to recapture the past, which can't be done. So poor she's never gonna be able to live up to the expectations Gatsby has. And we're gonna see Gatsby unravel from here on, because now everything in his life has been about getting to this moment. And now that he's there, it doesn't achieve what he hoped. And now his dream is gone. And it makes it so that what happens to him in the end is actually a blessing for him, not a bad thing. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the end. So anyway, hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope you've enjoyed this week of talking about it. We got one more week to come where we're going to nail down the rest of this book. And then we're going to finish up, and then we're going to move into talking about the American dream from the perspective of the earliest people in our country. Let me back up. We're looking at it from the European people arriving here. There were people here a long time before, and they had their own kind of dreams before. So we're going to mention those people too, but I want to back up. That was an irresponsible thing I said. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will see you again when we get to chapter 6.